Yeah. Okay, thank you. Welcome to all members of the council as well as members of the public who may be watching online. Before we formally begin the meeting, Ms. Kamalpreet Kaur, chaplain at Shri Guru Sabha Singh Sabha Gurdwara, Havelock Road Gurdwara in South Hall will bless the meeting.
May I request you all to kindly stand if you can for the prayer. Ik Oankar, one omniscient Lord. Satnam, true is thy name. Karta Purak, creator residing within his own creation. Nirpo, without fear. Nirvair, without enmity. Akal Murat, timeless being. Arjuni, beyond the circle of birth and death. Sepang, self-illuminated. Gurprasad, obtained by the grace of the true Master. Dear Vaiguruji, the wondrous Lord, we are gathered here at Ealing Council today for a very special budget meeting. Vaiguruji, our wondrous Lord, as Gurbani says, Mat Sumat Tere Vas Swami, wisdom, balanced wisdom is within your power. Please bless the members of the council with wisdom that translates into the greater public good. Please give them wisdom to serve the people who they are here to represent with honesty, integrity, respect, and without any prejudice or bias. Vaiguruji, our wondrous Lord, these are difficult times as the world fights pandemic and the challenges it brings every day. Russia has attacked Ukraine, causing innocent bloodshed. Please guide the humanity in the right direction. Let your people see your light in one and all, and let the peace prevail. Vaiguruji, give this council strength, willingness, and empathy to do the right thing by one and all. May they be guided by the needs of the people and not the need of profit alone. Help them uphold the social welfare and let them balance their deeds before they balance their books. Show their light through them, dear Lord. Bless the council. Nanak Naam Chardi Kala, Tere Pane Sarbat Da Pala. Says Nanak, thy name is the essence of all positivity. May your divine will help us work for everyone's welfare. Let the pure of heart belong to the wondrous Lord. The collective victory belongs to him too. Vaiguruji ka Khalsa, Vaiguruji ki Fateh. You may please sit down. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamalpreet. If you want to stay, you can stay. If you want to go, you are welcome to leave. Councillors, tonight's meeting will be broadcast live and a recording retained on the councillors' YouTube site. Therefore, I will presume everyone's consent to this happening. If you do not consent to this, then you should leave the meeting. There are a number of councillors who will be joining us remotely tonight via Zoom. These members will not be counted as formally being in attendance at the meeting for the purpose of Section 85 of the Local Government Act 1972. However, their virtual attendance will be recorded in the minutes under item 1. The members in attendance virtually will be able to speak at the meeting, but won't be able to take part in any votes. We will be having the windows open in the hall tonight to keep adequate ventilation. So I would encourage everyone to keep your warm clothing on if you need to. So we will start the meeting by taking the apologies. Are there any apologies?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I've received apologies for absence from councillors Mohan and Shabazz Ahmed.
Okay. So would you like to read the names of those who are attending virtually for record?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, happy to do so. I've got councillors Rai, Sharma, Summers, Daniel Crawford, Block, Basutil, Sabiers, Sumner, Conlon, Driscoll, Praveen Anand, Murta, Kate Crawford, Taylor, Blacker, Bell, Sahota, Dinsa, Dadwell, Burke, G-Man, Pada, Arman, Sarah Rooney, Woodruff, Anjum, and Byrne.
Thank you. Declaration of interest. Is there any? No. Matter to be considered in private, and I've got none. We had two meetings. One was on the 14th of December 21 and one on 17th of February 2022. I will need the confirmation of those minutes. So 14th of December, do we agree on the minutes of the 14th of December's meeting as true record? Thank you. The same goes for 17th February 22 meeting. Do we agree with the minutes of the meeting? Thank you. I've got few announcements to make, so I'll start with the first one. I'm sorry to announce the passing of Jamal Edwards, who passed away on 20th February, aged just 31 years. Jamal was appointed an MBE of Services to Music in 2014. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Jamal for supporting and inspiring so many young people to be the best they could be and showing what is possible with hard work and determination. Jamal was a true son of Ealing and will be greatly missed. It is with great sadness that I announce the passing of former councillor and past mayor Tejinder Singh Dhami, who passed away in December, aged 77 years. Sad is the loss of a fine human, colleague, councillor, past mayor, and a friend. On behalf of Ealing Council, I convey our deepest sympathy to his family. And to pay tribute to Councillor Dhami, I will be inviting one representative from each party. And I want to start with Councillor Ranjit Dheer to pay tribute to Councillor Dhami, please.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Mr. Mayor, as you say, past Mayor Councillor Dhami died on 17th of December, age 77, and he died of cancer. He was a devoted husband, father, and grandfather, and he leaves behind 3 daughters, a son, his wife, past Mayoress Mrs. Rajendra Kaur Dhami, and 6 grandchildren. Mr. Mayor, Councillor Dhami's death has understandably left a huge void in the life of the family, but it has also meant that the ward that he represented Dormer's Wealth for over a quarter of a century and the London Borough of Ealing have lost a dedicated public servant. Community organizations like the Indian Workers Association, of which he was General Secretary, have lost a great champion, and I have lost a personal friend. He was more than just a colleague to me. His funeral, Mr. Mayor, was held on 31st of December, and in the morning, hundreds of people came for the final farewells at the Sikh temple in Park Avenue. Later in the afternoon, there was a final service where the leader of the council, Peter Mason, Mr. Sharma, and myself, we attended and we spoke at the meeting. And I would say this to the family today, what I said at the final service meeting in the Gurdwara, which is that we know Councillor Dhami is gone. This is the law of life, life and death. And as it said in the Sikh scriptures, Kalle ave nanaka sadde uthi jai. That when the Lord bids you, you come, and when he calls you back, you go. And I hope that these words, the words of wisdom from the Sikh scriptures, would be of some comfort to the family. Mr. Mayor, as you said, that Councillor Dhami was mayor for the borough. He served on a number of committees, and when he was mayor, he raised £40,000 for the charities in the borough. The family has asked me to thank all friends and relatives and colleagues who have sent condolences messages, flowers and wreaths from the mayor's parlor. And they've also said that I should thank everybody who donated money to Councillor Dhami's nominated charity, which is Heartlink. And I think it's a great thing that even in his death, he was able to raise £6,000 for Heartlink, the charity in the borough. Finally, Mr. Mayor, he was a simple man, not very complicated, believed in public service and selfless service. I still remember when he was nominated mayor in 2018, Councillor Stafford, in seconding the nomination that I had made, he said this of Councillor Dhami, that Councillor Dhami is a thoroughly decent chap, a thoroughly decent chap. And I think in our cynical times, there's no greater compliment a man can get. And let Councillor Dhami rest in peace. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Deer. Councillor Stafford will pay tribute to Councillor Dhami.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And on behalf of the Conservative Group, I want to rise to pay tribute to Councillor Dhami and to pay our condolences to his family and friends and colleagues here today and watching online and at home. Councillor Deer was right. I don't use that phrase about many people, but Councillor Dhami was a thoroughly decent chap. And when I said that of him, I think it was before he became mayor, but even if it was afterwards, clearly his year as mayor demonstrated what a thoroughly decent chap he was. I think stand away from this bit. I think I told this story at the time, but I'll tell it again because I think it demonstrates that. I remember being at an event at the Brentham Club in my ward. It was the opening of a new cricket pavilion, and it was during the time when Councillor Dhami was mayor. And I'd arrived maybe a few minutes late. I was in the general crowd of people. There was no kind of pomp and circumstance for me. Obviously, as mayor, he was opening it. And he spotted me in the crowd. And in his speech, he singled me out to thank me as the ward councillor for coming to the opening of the event. And there was no need for him to do that. He wasn't prompted to do that. We were on different political sides, and perhaps a more cynical mayor might have decided that because we were, he or she wouldn't have mentioned me. But Councillor Dhami saw me, spoke about me, and made sure the other residents who were there at the opening knew I was there. And I just thought that was such a thoroughly decent thing to do that it just confirmed what an excellent man he was and what a loss he is to this council and to the borough as a whole. So, Mr. Mayor, once again, I pay our condolences and my personal condolences to his family. Eternal rest grant unto him, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon him.
Thank you. Councillor Steed, you would like to say a few words?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few words. On behalf of the Liberal Democrat group, I'd like to express our sorrow and pass on our sympathy and condolences to the family and friends of Councillor Dami. I can't say I knew the Councillor Dami well. In the encounters I had with him, following on the theme here, he always seemed a charming man. Across party divisions, he was always very, very friendly. And clearly his years of service as a public servant, like so many of the Southall councillors, was an exemplary example to the people in his community. So it is with sorrow that we note his passing. And as I say, we send our best wishes and condolences to his family. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, please join me for a minute's silence in the memory of past Mayor Councillor Dami. Thank you. So moving on, I must state that I strongly condemn the attack on Ukraine. On behalf of Ealing Council, I convey our thoughts and prayers to the innocent people affected at this very difficult time. We, of course, bear no animosity toward the Russian people, but condemn the actions of their president, Vladimir Putin. I know that there is a considerable support from all parties in this chamber who wish to condemn this attack against a peaceful democratic country. So can we all agree that we stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine at this time? Thank you. February was LGBT History Month. To mark this month, staff at the council organized a small exhibition in the foyer of Percival House. I would urge all members to take a look at it. It has now moved to the cafe area. I wish all councillors, officers, and residents a happy LGBT History Month. Lastly, but certainly not least, I welcome our interim Chief Executive, Paul Martin, to his first full council meeting here at Ealing. Now we move on to the agenda item 7, and I have not received any question from members of the public. So we will move to the question from member of the council.
Mr. Mayor, sorry, this is a bit unusual, and I probably should have discussed it with Councillor Shaw, but I wondered whether you'd like to move the Ukraine question to being the first question, given you have just spoken so eloquently on behalf of us all. It's just a suggestion. I've just thought about it now, actually, and I should have discussed it with Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, no objections here, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, that's fine. I can move that first. So, Councillor Rice will ask question to Councillor Mason. Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My great-grandmother, she was Ukrainian, and my grandmother was born in the Ukraine. And also my Polish cousin is over there right now on the border in Poland, helping refugees find somewhere to stay. And so she's doing incredible work, and I'm very extremely proud of what she's doing. So please, can the portfolio holder outline what support there is available to the large Ukrainian community in Ealing, as well as Ukrainian refugees?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This afternoon, I joined the Leader of the Magistrates' Opposition and the Leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, and the Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner, along with Rupak MP, to meet with Reverend Bohan Madlichuk, the head of the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church, and Father Yevon, the parish priest at the Communities Church in Acton, along with an ecumenical representative delegation and a delegation from the Ukrainian Embassy. We were able to meet with a number of Ealing and West London's Ukrainian community and hear firsthand from them the pain, distress, and terror they feel for the friends, family, and loved ones following the unilateral, barbaric, and illegal invasion by Russia of Ukraine. As we speak in this free and democratic forum in Europe, war rages on continental Europe, designed to crush the free will and the spirit of Ukrainians. It will not succeed. Ealing remains an open and welcoming borough. Throughout our history, we have risen to the task of settling refugees from conflict and disaster from all parts of the world, and count so many first-generation refugees as much-loved citizens, including a few in this room today. This morning, the government finally announced the relaxation of immigration rules, enabling Ukrainians with close family to sponsor for 12 months Ukrainians fleeing conflict, and a further scheme for companies and individuals to sponsor refugees has been announced, and we hope to receive those details soon enough. Just as Ealing always has done for those fleeing war in recent years, Syrians and for Afghans, we will extend the same hand of friendship and support to Ukrainians seeking refuge in our borough.
Councillor Rice, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Mason. Can the portfolio holder outline how residents may be able to help or send resources to help those in Ukraine and Ukrainian refugees?
So before Councillor Mesa answer, those who want to ask a second supplementary, please raise your hands. And those who are online, they can put a message in chat. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Mason, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I feel I can say safely that I speak for all residents of our borough in conveying our outrage and anger, but also our compassion and our support for the 1.4 million people already displaced from their homes, a humanitarian crisis in Europe, from Europe, not seen in generations, one that will only continue to grow. We continue to remain in contact with the Ukrainian community organisations, and Ealing residents can go onto the council's website to find out further information on how they can offer practical support. But I would say especially, Mr. Mayor, through donations. Donations to ensure that we deal with the unfolding humanitarian crisis at the European border. I'm sure the people of Ealing will dig deep, because the people of Ealing stand with Ukraine.
Thank you. Councillor Stafford, do you want to ask second supplementary?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And as my maternal grandfather is from that part of Ukraine, and I chair a charity that gives money to the Ukraine, the St. Michael Mission, I just want to utterly condemn the unprovoked, premeditated and illegal action that Russia has taken in the Ukraine. And we fully, on this side of the chamber, fully support solidarity for the Ukrainian people, which is being expressed across the world. And I want to welcome what the government has done, leading the world in many cases, implying sanctions on Russia. And of course, welcome everything that Councillor Mason has said that the council will be doing to support Ukrainians in this country and their families who unfortunately will be travelling over to us, fleeing that conflict. My question is to follow up. I'm glad that the council is doing work to encourage citizens of the borough to donate, winning both in terms of money and donations of clothing. What is being done to ensure that those refugees who come over here can be housed either by the council or by concerned citizens who wish to put them up in this borough.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Councillor Stafford, I'm sure will appreciate the council, having gone through the process of supporting both Syrian and Afghan refugees, has built up quite an experience of ensuring that those who do arrive in our borough, who do need our help and support, have the ability to access housing and other both social and emotional support. That network will continue to extend to Ukrainians who do come to this country as the government's programme starts rolling out. But I can assure him that that experience of being a welcoming and open borough is one that puts us in good stead to be able to offer that humanitarian support when people do arrive.
So taking into account the importance of this question, I've decided to take one member of each party to ask a supplementary question. Councillor Malcolm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, let me thank Councillor Mason for his actions on this in a relatively quick space of time and his commitment on this particular issue. I'm glad that we all agreed with the Mayor's statement about Putin's aggression. In terms of practical steps, what can the leader of the council do with his team in the press and the comms team in terms of installing communication on the website to make sure that people who have items such as medication, clothing, can actually find the person who is collecting it near where they live, so that as much stuff can get to the Ukrainians as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would say to Councillor Malcolm that the real priority, if I could sort of speak to the people of Ealing directly, if they were, listening, I'm sure, to our full council meeting, I would say at this stage, what the people of the Ukraine need is donations. We need to be able to ensure that there is money flowing to humanitarian organisations to be able to quickly scale up the efforts that they are doing in Poland and in other neighbouring countries to ensure that the refugees crossing the border have that immediate support. There is, of course, a huge logistical challenge of getting goods from the UK to Poland and to the border of Ukraine, but we would absolutely encourage people to make those donations. Information is available on the council's website right now. So if the people of Ealing Google that, they will find it. And as this situation develops, just as we did at the start of the pandemic through our network of Ealing Together, Ealing will remain together in support of Ukrainian refugees.
Thank you. The next question, Councillor Dadwal to Councillor Mahfouz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the portfolio holder...
Unmute, Councillor Dadwal, you are on mute. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now, Mr. Mayor? Can the portfolio holder tell me how...
Still can't hear you. So we will move on to the next question. So we will move on to Councillor Dadwal. We are moving to the next question, and you check if you can resolve this.
Mr. Mayor, sorry, maybe you could put it in the chat box and you could read it out on his behalf.
We will move on to the next question. In the meantime, Councillor Dadwal can put it in the chat box and I'll read it. Is that okay? The next one is Councillor Milligan to Councillor Costigan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So question to Councillor Costigan. How much has been raised from fines issued for driving through the barriers in the now redundant low traffic neighbourhood schemes?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Milligan. Of course, the question you asked was about redundant low traffic neighbourhoods, and the clue is, of course, in the question. They're redundant. I looked back. Did we receive any fines from redundant low traffic neighbourhoods last month? No, 0. In January, 0. In December, 0. In November, 0. In October, 0. Because, of course, we took the decision almost 5 months ago to remove 7 of the 9 experimental low-traffic neighbourhoods in Ealing, and that was because we did not have clear data that they worked, and we did not have the support of the local people who lived in those low-traffic neighbourhoods. We listened to residents and we took that decision. Of course, while the low-traffic neighbourhoods were in place, it was a contravention to go through the barriers, and there was a total of £5 million received in fines during that period of over a year. The vast majority of those fines came from people outside of Ealing Borough who were using our roads as rat runs through the borough. Now, as you will be aware, monies received from fines from people who contravene our traffic rules are ring-fenced, and we can only use them on transport-related schemes. In most years, we would use monies from fines on contributing to the cost of the Freedom Pass, which usually costs around £10 million or more. This year, we have had to actually focus a lot of the monies that we have received on the gigantic shortfall in our transport funding that normally comes from Transport for London, which is funded by central government. Central government has refused to fund TfL this year. There's a gigantic hole in their budget. They're going week by week, hand in whatever that saying is, I can't remember, head in hands probably, TfL, asking for this funding from government when we know that their finances have gone through the floor because nobody's been on the tube due to COVID. The government is penalising London. They have paid to keep the transport system going in the rest of the country, but not in London. So we're having to focus some of those resources on making sure that we can keep things going in Ealing. I hope that you can speak to your friends in government and get them to properly fund Transport for London. Thank you.
Okay, before you ask, those who want to ask second supplementary, please make sure I can see you. Councillor Milligan, you want to ask?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Costigan, for finally getting round to answering the question. The figure is £5 million. Now, we know, Mr. Mayor, that money is sitting unallocated in budgets at the moment. It is not being used the way you have described. And so could I put it to you that we should do the right thing and refund that money to the people of Ealing?
Councillor Costigan.
I would ask, first of all, if Councillor Milligan would withdraw the statement he just made, where he said it is not being used in the way I describe. I think that you're saying that I have not told you what is actually the case. I can tell you that we have spent some of this monies on our active travel charter, which we're currently consulting local people on. We're doing that because we want to make sure local people are absolutely involved in decisions about their streets and about traffic in their area in the future. We've also spent some of that monies on the Hanwell to Southall cycle route, which I think people across the borough have been crying out for segregated cycle routes. So if you have something to back up your claim, and you know more than I do and more than council officers do and more than our finance staff know, then let me know. But please don't make stuff up. Thank you, Councillor Milligan.
I'm absolutely not making
Councillor Praveen Anand will ask a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the portfolio holder give an update?
Councillor Anand, we've still got a problem. Sam, I think we've got some technical. So shall I ask them to just put it in the chat box then?
Mr. Mayor, we can hear.
Councillor Praveen Anand, we can't hear you, so you will have to put it in the chat box, but I think I have to.
I think there's a technical issue.
Now.
Mr. Mayor, we can hear him.
We'll move on to the next.
Gosh.
There's no question on the chat box from Praveen.
I'll give a question, 1 minute.
Praveen, just type your question.
Okay.
Or copy and paste.
So we move on to the next question.
Sorry,
Yeah, there isn't
Mr. Mayor, just on a point, please. Perhaps we could just have a couple of minutes recess just to see what's happening with the technology here, because I don't understand why it's not working at the moment.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, we can hear everybody.
Yes, that's right. We can hear it on Zoom, but they can't hear us.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, everybody. Very sad what's happening in Ukraine. Very deeply sorry about that. Can the portfolio holder please give an update on the active travel charter in Ealing and how it will incorporate lessons learned from the LTN scheme? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Yes, Councillor Costigan.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Anand, for the supplementary question and for giving me the opportunity to tell councillors about our active travel charter. Of course, the idea behind the active travel charter came from the independent report which we commissioned on the implementation of low traffic neighbourhoods in Ealing. That report found that there were certainly things that we could have done better. And one of those was around consultation with local residents, and another was about having clear before and after data before we bring in low traffic neighbourhoods or other active travel schemes. So what we have done is we have taken the advice of the independent report, which we published in full, and we accepted all of its recommendations, and we have decided to set up a Travel in Ealing active travel charter. And we have got consultants who are experts in active travel, and we are spending some of the monies that we've received from fines, just to answer Councillor Milligan's question from earlier on this. We have, in the last few weeks, contacted stakeholders across the borough, people who were very active in talking to us about transport in the last couple of years, but also groups of residents associations and other voluntary organisations who are interested in transport in the borough. We've started off with a survey where people can tell us what their previous experience was of working with the borough on transport initiatives, and we're going to follow that up with in-depth discussions and engagements with those groups. We're going to end up, we hope, with a charter that will give us a framework for how we look at active travel schemes in the future, because we are very much focused on making sure that our active travel schemes are successful, sustainable, and most of all can be supported by local residents.
Thank you. The next one is Councillor Dadwal to Councillor Mahfouz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the portfolio holder tell me how Ealing's residents will be affected by the government's cost of living crisis and what Ealing Council are doing to help?
Thank you, Councillor Dadwal. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So sadly, whilst ordinary Russians can very much thank their cost of living crisis on their political leadership in Putin, us Brits can thank ours, this cost of living crisis, on Boris Johnson's making. The decisions he has made and campaigned for in the past few years as Prime Minister and before mean that those on the lowest incomes have already seen their universal credit cut by over £1,000 a year. £1,000 a year. They will see their energy bills soar by at least another £700 a year. In the shops, they're already feeling the pinch of runaway inflation at a 30-year high. And as if salaries weren't being squeezed enough, national insurance hike on salaries and for employers in April will further reduce people's hard worked for earnings. Mr. Mayor, thousands of our borough's residents who have already endured unfathomable hardships over the past 24 months, whilst those responsible partied and sipped in champagne, are being hit even harder in the coming months, clobbered by the Conservative cost of living crisis. Meanwhile, Mr. Mayor, we have been doing our bit to help those hardest hit, those left behind, those who this government has forgotten about. We are showing them we are on their side. Our plan for good jobs has already helped nearly 4 1,000 residents into new or better paid jobs. Almost 13,000 residents now have qualifications that they didn't have before. Nearly 800 apprenticeships have been created. We have launched the new Youth Hub to provide targeted support to young people into work and training. We've hit our target for the number of living wage employers across the borough. Over 1,000 households have been supported through our welfare assistance team so far this year alone. Over £234 million worth of package of support for businesses have been paid out or in reliefs more quickly than any other borough. And as well as the below inflation rate council tax that we are proposing later on this evening, which will provide more support to those in our borough most in need. We have, of course, our progressive council tax reduction scheme, which is supporting around 24,500 of our residents. In providing that support, Mr. Mayor, we don't take into account 100% of income that comes from benefits. And Mr. Mayor, over 8,000 of those who currently receive that council tax support get 100% discount on their council tax. And Mr. Mayor, this isn't all. Going forward, Ealing Labour will be bringing forward even more ambitious plans to be on the side of residents across our borough. And I may mention a little bit more about that later on this evening.
Thank you. Councillor Dadwal, you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What response did Councillor Mason and Councillor Mahfouz receive when they wrote to the Chancellor about this matter last year?
Yes, Councillor. Yes, Councillor Mahfouz.
Sorry, that was the answer. Silence from the Chancellor. We wrote to him. We offered a number of solutions that he could have put forward to help the residents here in Ealing, but his response was silence. Not even the courtesy of a reply. He could have cut VAT, as the Brexiteers themselves, his own Prime Minister, had promised beforehand, which would have saved residents around £100 a year, but he didn't. He could have reversed a swingeing cut of £1,000 a year through their universal credit, but he didn't. He could have guaranteed to support families on free school meals for the forthcoming year, but he didn't. I'm sure he's probably waiting for some footballers and local authorities to shame him in the coming year. He'll probably do another U-turn on that one. He could have committed to supporting our transport infrastructure, as Councillor Costigan has already pointed out, but he didn't. Instead, his only announcements have been to plough on with increasing the tax burden to 70-year record levels, to plough on with the cut to universal credit, to put forward some ridiculous £200 loan, not loan, to support people through the energy fuel crisis, just to kick that can further down the road so it could be clobbered later. And Mr. Mayor, this is a Chancellor and a Prime Minister that are simply not on the side of the residents of Ealing. And as my previous answer, we most certainly are.
Thank you. Councillor Young will ask a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Whilst the government is funding local councils a £150 energy rebate for all households in Band A to D, how much more will the average Band D taxpayer have to fund your 3% tax increase tonight? Tax increase, by the way, which the majority of which is going into reserves rather than into services.
Sorry, so Councillor Young there refers to the drop in the ocean of £150, which will go to bands A to D. But actually, as I say, the package of the Conservative cost of living crisis increase runs into four-figure sums, well over £1,000, probably nearer £2,000, if not more, per household in the UK. And what Councillor Young there is proposing to us, is saying to us, is that the Chancellor is giving £150 to some households. And then he's talking about our below inflation increase in council tax. Our below inflation council tax increase which his own Chancellor expects us to make that decision. He's already factored it in to his local government funding proposals. If we didn't take it, he'd be saying, why aren't you taking it? Because I've told you to take it to pay for social care. I've told you to take it to support the most vulnerable residents in your borough, and you're not taking it. So the reality is that's where we stand. And actually that £150, as usual, a rush through decision in policy making on the hoof, grabs the headlines, forgets that there'll be some key people there that will actually lose out. There'll be households who don't have direct debit set up and don't necessarily pick up on the comms that we'll put out there, and they may not even have bank accounts, and they're going to be missing out potentially on £150. There'll be households where the landlord is the person named as the liable individual on the council tax, and they'll receive the windfall, as we've seen with business rates rebates time and time again. But those people who are actually paying it to the landlord, what will they get? Will they see that windfall? Who knows? Maybe, maybe not. And what about those mixed households? Maybe key workers, maybe groups of nurses or school teachers living together. You know, if one person will get that payment back in their account, and then they'll have to try and divvy it up amongst others. There's going to be households that are going to be struggling to pay the thousands of extra pounds on fuel and food bills, but won't be getting the support because this government is absolutely failing them. It's another example of government policy being ill thought through. And of course, those households will come to us for financial support, and we'll be doing our best to make sure that we are on their side. But Mr. Mayor, the Conservatives, we saw no answer there to the cost of living crisis, because quite simply, they are the cost of living crisis.
Thank you. The next question will be asked by Councillor Busuttil to Councillor Costigan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the portfolio holder inform us how many electric vehicle charging points there are in the whole borough, and how does this compare to other boroughs in London?
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Busuttil, for the question. And I'm pleased to tell you that we currently have 299 publicly available electric vehicle charging points across the borough, but our objective is to increase that radically, and we are on course by the summer to bring that total up to 500. And that is part of our ambition to ensure that residents have no more than 10 minutes to walk to get to an electric vehicle charging point in the borough. And you've asked where that would bring us in terms of London. By the summer, we expect that we'll be 5th overall in London for the provision of electric vehicle charging points, which I think is a huge success for our borough and shows how seriously we take our commitment to climate action in this borough. But of course, again, as I raised earlier, the installation of charging points has been hampered by the government's reluctance to fund Transport for London properly, because we do get funding from TfL to put EVCPs in place. So the government decision around this funding has been completely politicised. And as I said earlier, these negotiations, we're getting funding deals week by week, which nobody can plan ahead for, neither TfL nor the London boroughs. And really, the government have forced this unnecessary distraction on all of us in a time when we should have been focused on COVID and trying to recover from the pandemic. TfL is facing an almost £2 billion budget black hole. And if the new funding isn't announced, we're going to see 1 in 5 bus routes, 10% of tube services, and 43,000 jobs outside London scrapped. So it's clear that public transport in the capital will grind to a halt without a long-term funding plan. And really across London, whether it's trade unions, whether it's the city, we're all united in opposing the government's stance and their just refusal to fund Transport for London. They need to set out substantial long-term funding for Transport for London. And I really hope that the Liberal Democrats will back Labour's stance on this, and will also do the work that we're doing to try and push the government to negotiate. So it'd be really helpful if you put your money where your mouth is on this, Councillor Busuttil, and you actually push the government to do something about it. If the government is serious about meeting its climate commitments, it needs to urgently fund TfL so that boroughs like ourselves can continue to roll out electric vehicle charging points. Thank you.
Councillor Busuttil, if you have a supplementary, you can ask now.
Thank you very much. I do. Thank you for your answer, Councillor Costigan. Are you therefore in support of allowing over-pavement electric vehicle car charging using the appropriate equipment for safety reasons so residents can switch to electric vehicles sooner, aiding the borough's carbon neutral strategy until such time there is sufficient on-street charging capacity?
Councillor Costigan.
Thank you, Councillor Busuttil. As I often say when I go around the borough and speak to residents, Ealing Council, along with about 2/3, in fact, of councils, has a climate emergency strategy which is streets ahead of the government's own so-called strategy. We've committed to net zero by 2030 when the government has only made a measly commitment to achieving the same by 2050. And they have been absolutely unclear about how they were going to make that happen. And I think you've put your finger on one of the issues there, in that the infrastructure on our streets in order to back a shift to electric vehicles is not there, and we're not getting the backing from government to see it put in place. So I think absolutely far more action needs to be taken, and we will continue to do what we are doing in Ealing Council to make up for that gap in vision and in delivery from government, who really pale in comparison to the huge strides coming from, I have to say, councils from all political backgrounds across the country who are doing far more to try and fight climate change than our government is doing.
For second supplementary, Councillor Ray Wall to Councillor Costigan.
Can you hear me now? Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the portfolio holder give an update on funding to ensure that roads in Ealing are safe and accessible for all users?
Thank you very much, Councillor Wall, for the question. We're absolutely committed to ensuring that people walking and cycling in our borough feel safe on our roads, and that other sources of danger are eliminated as far as possible. Councillor Blacker and I were pleased to visit the next section of the Uxbridge Road cycle lane, which is under construction from Hanwell to Southall, and that will provide an entirely segregated cycle lane and protected from all traffic, including buses. And I think that's a great thing to achieve, to have got that kicked off last month. We're going to hear shortly tonight, because we're here to talk about the budget, and we'll hear from Councillor Donnelly on the budget. But I'm pleased to confirm that we've allocated more than 20 million in the capital budget to improving our roads, and that includes cycle lanes and footways. When we do any road improvement project, we also make sure that we do the crossover treatments, that we do the junctions at the same time, so that we make it easier for people who are walking or cycling or scooting through the borough. And safety is at the heart of all of the decisions we make when allocating our street improvement funding, and we'll take every opportunity to maximise active travel while we're putting in these works. Finally, I think we've made the whole borough a 20-mile-per-hour zone, and I think that's a great thing, and it's really supported by residents. However, we have an issue in that we do not have the power to enforce 20-mile-per-hour zones. This is a power that is reserved to the Metropolitan Police. Now, I have, along with Better Ealing Streets, written to government to ask them if they would give local councils the power to enforce instead, because I'm afraid we all know that the police have seen millions cut out of their budget in London, and they need to focus their limited resources on some of the really serious crimes that come in every day. And as a result, 20-mile-per-hour zones aren't always at the top of the agenda. Well, I've written to Grant Shapps, who is the Secretary of State for Transport, on a number of occasions now, including, for example, on the HGV driver crisis. He never replies to me. I don't know why, but on this occasion, he got one of his underlings to reply to me in relation to 20-mile-per-hour enforcement. And Baroness Veer replied to me on this last month and to Better Ealing Streets. And I'm afraid she has refused point blank to give us the powers to enforce 20-mile-per-hour zones, which is hugely disappointing. And I don't know what world she's living in, because she won't fund the police to enforce 20-mile-per-hour zones, and she won't give local councils the power to do it instead. We're crying out for that power, but she just won't give it to us. I'm just so disappointed, as I say. I really don't know why they won't do this. This is a real issue on our streets. We could enforce that. We could make a difference, but we're not being allowed. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, Councillor Kumar to Councillor Raza.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Given the escalating concerns for the safety of women and girls across the borough, will you commit to reversing your action of dimming street lights and increase their luminosity?
Thank you, Councillor Kumar.
Councillor Raza.
Sorry. Thank you, Councillor Kumar, for your excellent question. In 2015, Ealing embarked on a 2-year programme of works to reduce the carbon, the energy emissions throughout the borough. And this was via using the low energy LED bulbs. This project involved the replacement of over 20,000 lighting units and their subsequent dimming. And this began in December 2016. However, following a number of tragic, violent and horrific events in London against women, we now know that it's important to ensure that our women feel safe on our streets. This is why we launched our A Safer Ealing for Women listening exercise. And this aims to gain a better insights and understanding of the experiences and the perceptions that women have across our borough, in the public spaces and across Ealing. We just finished yesterday the detailed listening and engagement exercise with residents, which explored all of the aspects of women's safety and what we want to do in the borough to improve this. These will be carefully considered, and the responses and the feedback and those proposals will then be formulated into something that we'll bring back to council. Whether it's physical, technical, or service design changes, these will make our borough safer for women. And we know that our street lighting has the facility to be able to be increased or decreased with the lighting levels that they allow. And it depends on the requirement of that the area concerned. This will of course carry a cost, and alongside the costs of resulting in the increased energy, there will also be the CO2 emissions, which in turn carry climate change levy fees. And we will therefore bring forward these options to reconcile these competing demands for councillors to determine our next steps after our detailed consideration of the listening and engagement exercise that have recently been completed.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar, you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do, Mr. Mayor.
Please.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Raza. My supplementary is, will you support our pledge to work with the Met Police to bring the police closer to Ealing residents by bringing back a police hub in each council ward?
Well, I think Councillor Kumar knows very well the situation that our local police teams are under, and actually the financial implications that they are under and the pressures that they're under to actually have hubs and stations that are opening. Unfortunately, ours is closing across the road, and that is massively due to the fact that they're not very well funded centrally from the Tory government. So a lot of that sort of pressure that we're facing locally is dripping down from what we're seeing from government.
For second supplementary, Councillor Ball.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Returning to the original question, I agree entirely with Councillor Kumar that the dim streetlights have shown themselves to be a false economy that causes a huge amount of unnecessary fear amongst our residents. But that is not all. Is the portfolio holder aware that academic studies have shown that poor street lighting is associated with increased crime? And is she also aware that we have just started a petition to stop streetlight dimming at ealinglibdems.org.uk/streetlights?
Well, as I said in my answer to Councillor Kumar, the listening exercise has been our main sort of compass on this. We'll be looking at the data that's coming back to us. Part of the listening exercise was a map, an interactive map tool that women were able to tell us exactly where they feel safe and where they feel things should be different. There was also an opportunity for women to tell us whether they felt the lighting or any other structure, like perhaps the line of vision or things like undergrowth that might be overgrown, all sorts of reasons why women might feel unsafe. So clearly, all that data is still being analysed, given that the listening exercise literally closed yesterday. So as I said before, I will be bringing it back to council once we have something concrete from our listening event.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. We are moving on to the next item, item number 9, budget strategy for 22-23. But before we start that, Labour Chief Whip, Councillor Gareth Shaw, is going to move a procedural motion on the timing. Councillor Shaw, you want to move the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the procedure rule 14.5 on length of speeches is suspended for this item to allow each member speaking first from each group for a maximum of up to 8 minutes.
So can the opposition agree to that and second? Well, we are limited on time and we have passed the time, so we are moving on to the next item. We've got a lot to cover, Councillor Milligan. Okay, thank you. Thanks. I'm going to call on Councillor Donnelly to propose the motion. Councillor Donnelly? You have 8 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hope 8 minutes will be sufficient. I'm proud to move our budget proposals for 2022-23, the first budget under Peter Mason's leadership. I look forward to an interesting and lively debate this evening. I want to start by thanking Ross Brown and his team in finance, together with colleagues right across the council, who brought this budget together in a technical sense in a matter of a few weeks, since the 2022-23 local government finance settlement was belatedly announced in mid-December. It's a matter of frustration and alarm in councils right across the country, of all political persuasions, that the present government's policy redefines short-termism, leaving councils with no prospect of devising any meaningful medium-term financial strategy. As will no doubt become a theme for this evening's discussions, officers have been working in unprecedented, challenging conditions to deliver for residents, respond to COVID, and ensure we have a robust, resilient and fair budget for the coming year. In return, the government provides only uncertainty. I also want to thank all our officers for their tireless work over the last 2 years in particular. When we first went into lockdown, no one could have predicted how long it would take for us to emerge and how many residents would tragically lose loved ones. It's important that as we look forward, we also look back to acknowledge how much has changed. Throughout the uncertainty of the last few years, the council has stepped up to support our residents. Within just a few months of the first lockdown announcement, we introduced the COVID Hardship Fund, worth more than £2 million for low-income families, provided over 14,000 emergency food parcels, working with our vibrant schools and voluntary sectors. And we continue to support our most vulnerable residents with one of the most generous and progressive council tax support schemes in existence, which provides up to 100% discount for families with a weekly income below £124 33 pence. This budget's of a slightly different character compared with recent years. We are cautiously emerging from the pandemic, but we cannot afford to lose sight of what we have learned. In particular, COVID and indeed Ukraine have shown us that the unimaginable can happen. We need to be flexible and prepared to respond to whatever might come our way. Inflation is also at a 30-year high, so it's costing us more than ever to deliver our statutory duties. And all this necessitates ensuring a stable and secure financial footing with reserves sufficient to deal with events and to deliver for the residents of Ealing. As a result, Mr. Mayor, in this budget, we have set aside an extra £3.75 million to deal with uncertainty. We've now had more than a decade of government austerity. Council budgets are insufficient, unreliable, and unpredictable. The government's financial modelling, the so-called core spending power we may hear about from Councillor Young, relies on local authorities increasing council tax as much as we are allowed to. We simply cannot rely on government streams of funding to meet our statutory demands, deliver for residents on our other priorities, and ensure we're prepared to respond to challenges and shocks that occur. Consequently, the budget proposes an increase in council tax of 1.99%, together with the 1% maximum precept for adult social care available this year. While we're taking steps to ensure financial robustness, we're also responding to residents' needs now. The budget supports the key priorities of the administration: good jobs, the climate crisis, tackling inequality. Contains over £5 million of growth investment. As a council, as Councillor Costigan said earlier when stealing from my speech, we are committed to ensuring our roads are safe and well maintained. And so we are investing the £20 million that she mentioned, including crucial over 3 years, with crucial maintenance for cycle lanes and pavements, as well as roads. On top of that, we budgeted over £200,000 to roll out an enhanced controlled parking zone programme where residents want it. And we've allocated nearly £500,000 for parking enforcement cameras to crack down on dangerous and illegal parking. And we'll be ready and able to expand our school streets programme where evidence shows it would be effective. We're committed to maintaining funding for the vital community policing and safety programmes, which have returned visible policing to our streets despite reckless government cuts. We continue to prioritise seriously our obligations to vulnerable children and adults, so these areas are seeing growth in revenue budgets. Already, around 60 pence in every pound of our budget is spent on helping adults and children. That's substantially more than the total we raised through council tax and the social care precept. Yet we continue to be hamstrung by the shameful, abject failure of government to propose and enact a real reform of social care at national level. And in the absence of national leadership, we are taking the decisions needed to deliver locally for our residents. Our capital investment plans include major refurbishment of Carmelita House, which is jointly funded with our public health partners. We know that the service provided at Carmelita House for children with additional needs is a lifeline for families and is vital for supporting children and families in the community. This is the fourth and last budget of the current council, Mr. Mayor. Soon the parties will go to the people in elections. I'm sure that Councillor Mason and others may have more to say on that subject. But this Labour administration will go into the election having managed the borough and its finances effectively and creatively in the midst of unprecedented turmoil in our society. We built the 2,500 homes. We delivered the 150 apprenticeships. We saved Ealing Hospital's A&E. We planted 37,000 trees. We set up the Race Equality Commission. And we demonstrated that responsible administration can and must show compassion to all those in our community who need it. Labour, Mr. Mayor, will stand on our manifesto, on our record of achievement, and on sound financial management exemplified in the budget before the council tonight. I so move.
Now, Councillor Mason will second the motion and will speak for 4 minutes.
Mr. Mayor, when we were re-elected to lead Ealing Council in 2018, we could not have imagined what would have unfolded over the next 4 years. A global pandemic and political instability bringing unprecedented challenges, whilst equally highlighting the effects of structural racism and inequality that already existed. The pandemic had a knock-on effect on Ealing's economy, with unemployment growing and Ealing having one of the highest furlough rates in London. As the government failed to address the housing crisis and failed to reform social care, we experienced an ever-growing demand for our services, whilst also facing crippling cuts to local authority budgets, and the government's programme of austerity continued. Despite this, Labour has delivered 2,500 genuinely affordable homes, delivered 37,000 trees planted, delivered 750 apprenticeships, delivered greener Ealing back in-house and complaints slashed to record low levels, delivered, and saving Ealing's A&E. However, we know that there is so much more to do, and the challenges we face right now must be matched by our ambition to empower the people of Ealing. Ealing's budget is so much more than a set of numbers. It sets out how we will change our borough for the better and prepare us for the challenges ahead and the key priorities of this administration and our party that we hope the people of Ealing will support in May. To recover from the pandemic, we will secure 10,000 new well-paid jobs across our borough to help every family get a decent living income. The coronavirus has hit people's incomes hard, so we will secure new well-paid jobs to support people back into work after lockdown and deliver more support for small and local businesses to thrive. Regrow, rewild, and recycle. We will create 10 new parks and open spaces, plant 50,000 more trees, and give 800,000 square meters back to nature. Everyone agrees that we need to tackle the climate crisis, protect the environment, and do even more to make our borough cleaner and greener, and make so much more of our borough open and accessible for people to enjoy. Genuinely affordable homes. We will deliver 4,000 new, safe, and genuinely affordable homes. London's affordable housing crisis means that we need to do everything that we can to build more homes that cost no more than a third of household incomes, stop people being priced out of the housing market, and build many more council homes to rent. Tackle the cost of living. We will keep council tax low, help families with the cost of living, and to protect the most vulnerable. Since 2010, we've saved the average family £2,500 by keeping council tax either frozen or as low as possible. Fight crime and antisocial behaviour by investing 13 million in fighting antisocial behaviour, violent crime and burglary and violence against women. And we will campaign for the powers that we need to enforce the rules and make our neighbourhoods safer and punish rule breakers and ensure that no one, Councillor Stafford, is above the law. And we will fix social care. We've saved Ealing's A&E, and now we need to fix social care, supporting more people to stay at home and paying the London living wage for our care workers. COVID-19 has shown clearly that the government should fix social care so that it is not left to local council taxpayers. Mr. Mayor, these are our priorities, the priorities of the people of Ealing, the pledges on which we will stand: an open, inclusive, and transparent party. On your side, always. I commend and second this budget.
Thank you. So now Councillor Young will speak from the opposition for 8 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'd like to thank Ross Brown and his officer team for all the hard work they've done putting together this budget this year. This is on top of administering the government COVID relief measures, which are a massive effort in themselves. I always think that the budget is like the Forth Road Bridge. That once you finish painting it, you have to start again. I know that after a very short break, they'll be starting on work for next year's budget. There's no time off for them at all. Councillors Donnelly and Mason have told you a narrative about how impoverished this council is. But the truth is that in austerity, we froze council tax for 8 years. We couldn't have done that if we weren't well funded. We're well funded again now. Core spending power has increased by 6.32% this year, fed by extra government grants of 13.7 million. The 6.32% is this year, but over 3 years, it's increased by more than 20%. And our spending pressures have not increased by 20% in 3 years. So what is proposed is a 2.99% increase in council tax to raise £4.6 million, of which 3.7 million is proposed to go into reserves. £34 million is the level of our committed non-ring-fenced reserves at the moment. Our total reserves are over £150 million. GLA proposing to increase the precept by 8.78%. Sadiq Khan is going to push the total bill to our council taxpayers up by 4.25%. The Mayor of London's role appears to be mismanaging the GFL, mismanaging Crossrail, and encouraging strikes on London Underground. The only thing he seems to have achieved is managing to double the spending by bureaucrats in the GLA. Returning from the GLA's mismanagement to Ealing's, we're borrowing over £1 million to fund our capital programme. We can't afford £4 million of capital to refurbish Gurnell swimming pool. Our big projects behind the clock, 26-storey building at the back of the town hall, Gotham Tower as it's been nicknamed, is at least 2 years behind schedule. In this building, the town hall was supposed to be turned into a hotel about 5 years ago. Last year, we failed to achieve £4.5 million of our projected savings. If you add that to the £5 million extra we're spending on GEL, because I remember when our management consultants advised us on the reletting the Green Ealing contract, they said we ought to budget for £16 million. We're spending £5 million more than that now, and £5 million more than we need to. We don't know how much it's going to cost us to change our chief executive, but you can guess it's going to be upwards of £500,000. And we're taking £1.4 million from motorists, on top of the £5 million from the LTNs and £2 million from the band turns at Longfield Avenue. I see we're proposing to take another £500,000 from enforcement of school streets and bus lanes. Now, forgive me, but I don't think school streets should be used to raise money. They ought to be for safety, and air quality method. They're not well signposted, and I think that's going to be the next scandal. It's not clear whether they operate during school holidays or half terms. They're badly signposted, and many people will be trapped unnecessarily. Looking at the budget, the detail shows the petty nature of some of these savings. I've talked about the £1.4 million of drivers. Part of that's being made by increasing commuter parking, by increasing the number of pay and display bays available to commuters. That is totally at odds with this council's administration's policies on reducing car use. I know that the CVZ part-day discount is being halved from £10 to £5, and the two-car surcharge is being increased by 10% from £50 to £55, which means that a household with 4 cars, maybe have 2 adult children at home, is going to be paying £330 in surcharges. It's a tax on larger families, in effect. There's a new charge being introduced of £16 for changing details on the CPZ. Well, I've done that change. It takes a few minutes with a click of the mouse on the computer. There's no reason for us to charge that amount of money for enforcing the change. But the worst detail is visitor parking permits, going up from 60p to 80p an hour, going up by a third. If that isn't bad enough, the vulnerable people visitor permits are going up from 60p to 80p, going up by a third. So the people who are visiting The elderly, the needy, the most vulnerable in society can pay 30% more to visit them. Mr. Mayor, this administration is squandering a strong fiscal position with unnecessary tax increases and petty charges on residents. We beg to oppose it.
Thank you. From Liberal Democrats, Councillor Steed will speak for 8 minutes, but you can speak for less if you want.
Thanks. Firstly, thanks to Ross Brown and his team for always finding the time to give the Liberal Democrat group briefings. To echo some of the comments made already, the past 2 years have indeed been extraordinary for all residents, and it is impossible to talk about the budget without the issue of the pandemic always in our mind. Far too many people have suffered, and many people continue to suffer. We have at the same time witnessed some incredible actions by some people who have behaved so selflessly. The Liberal Democrats have acknowledged previously and are happy to acknowledge again the work of Ealing Council officers in supporting residents and businesses through the pandemic. Suffice to say, we are not out of the woods yet, but we must all be gladdened by some return to normality. As has been commented by many, if 2021 was a difficult year, we currently are going through yet more new historical events. Clearly, events in a land not so far away are on our minds, but for the moment, we need to try and focus on events somewhat closer to home. As has been the case for some years now, the background for the budget is ominous, especially for those most vulnerable. The Conservative government is no friend of local government and seems to go out of its way to make life difficult. Central government funding is far too little. It's subject to changes, and information on grants is far too late. Events have produced a perfect storm of inflation at a 30-year high, huge increases in energy bills, tax hikes, cuts in universal credit. In the meantime, the disastrous effects of Brexit continue to make life incredibly difficult for industry and anyone with ambitions to export. We even have the absurd situation of the key transport system of the nation's capital city held to ransom, seemingly out of pure political spite. The Labour administration, like all local authorities, has to contend with increased national insurance costs and the ever-spiralling cost of social care. They have made a commitment to maintain support for the most vulnerable in providing council tax relief. We acknowledge these issues and continue to support the need to assist those on low incomes. Labour have also indicated that they need to raise council tax to support our community, which is a somewhat vague statement, coupled with a claim to keep council tax low for at least the next 4 years. The Liberal Democrat group agree that there is a need to support our community, but in the scenario, but the attitude of the Conservative government is unlikely to change, is one to assume that every year we will have the maximum council tax increases allowed without a referendum. I ask, as Labour also say they need to increase council tax to meet obligations, but also to meet their political ambitions. This is possibly where we part our ways, where there are many basic areas where Labour is underperforming the majority of residents across the borough. Their ambitions may be worthy, but is the focus of the administration on the right things? Their pledges include to recover from the pandemic, but we hear recently that Brompton Bikes are intending to move down to Kent by 2030, with the loss of skilled jobs. They aim to regrow, rewild and recycle, but Acton Depot has been shut and recycling rates have been stalled. Labour talk about genuinely affordable homes, when no one really believes such a thing exists. There is, and always will be, a need for genuine social housing. There is a pledge to fight the cost of living, but council rents are going up and council tax is increasing. Finally, Labour talk about crime and violence against women. We know from our own Liberal Democrat surveys that fear of crime is common amongst women and that many streets are too dark, an issue that was addressed earlier. Yet Labour dimmed all the streets in 2015, as we heard from the portfolio holder, and refuse at the moment to reverse that decision. There are inconsistencies and contradictions in many of Labour's plans for Ealing. And certainly the residents in Southfield Ward do not feel the Labour Council is on their side. And that, Mr. Mayor, is why we'll be voting against the Labour budget. I thank you.
Thank you. The rest of the speakers will have 4 minutes, so keep the timing, please. Councillor Brett.
Thank you. So let me just begin by reminding us of where we are right now. Yes, a reflection on Tory cuts is yet more added gloom to the reality of life, but a reflection is necessary as a sharp reminder of who we've got in power. We have had a decade of cutting, trimming, and tightening of our belts from this government. And let's remind ourselves that Boris Johnson and his chums will have more waves of cuts coming in store very soon. This government have presided over the highest inflation in more than 30 years, heralding fuel, energy, and food bills rising at breakneck speed. This has widened the gap for the poorest and most vulnerable in our community. It has been a non-stop onslaught. The cost of living crisis we're in right now is only going to get worse. This is forcing local councils like ours to make some really tough budget decisions. It's far from where we'd like to be, but unfortunately, it's where we have been forced to be. This is the backdrop we're faced with. More people are struggling and in need of support. These are the people we walk past on the street every day, our neighbours, our friends, and our family. This council has faced unprecedented demand from the COVID fallout, adults and children's social care and housing, to name but a few. During the pandemic, we have strived to support our local residents by introducing a COVID hardship fund, by providing nearly 30 million in council tax support for vulnerable residents and providing over 14,000 food parcels. Despite continuous cuts, and yes, once again, deja vu, a lack of support from this Tory government, we as a Labour-led council are putting our residents and the services they need at the forefront of our plans, as highlighted in the budget by Councillor Donnelly. We are doing this by securing 10,000 well-paid jobs for every family to get a decent income, delivering 4,000 genuinely affordable homes, tackling the cost of living crisis by keeping council tax low and making sure we protect the most vulnerable with our council tax support scheme, investing 13 million in fighting antisocial behaviour, violent crime and addressing violence against women, helping to fix social care by supporting people to stay at home and giving carers the London living wage, regrow, rewild and recycle to help the climate crisis, making our borough greener and cleaner. I will be voting in support of this budget to help fund vital services, support our residents and remain financially stable in a time of great uncertainty.
Councillor Stafford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I'd like to echo the comments that have been made about Ross Brown and his officers and to express our thanks for the work that he and his team have done to pull this budget together. In marked contrast, I have to say, to Councillor Mafuzi's appalling conflation of Putin and the Prime Minister earlier on, which I hope you'll reflect on. From the Conservative point of view, as we have done in previous years, we support the increase in the social care precept, the adult social care precept, because we do wish to see that area properly funded. But we do not agree with taking more money for the core council tax from the hard-working people of this borough. And I'll outline why now. This is my 15th budget that I've had the pleasure, in inverted commas, of scrutinising and voting upon since I've been a councillor. And I always say in the last few years that these have been unambitious budgets, but this one has topped it by being the most unambitious budget we have seen in those 15 years, completely devoid of ideas. Given that it's Shrove Tuesday, I would almost say it's as flat as a pancake in its ambition. And as those of us who are Christians are moving into the Lent period, I'm reminded of that Lenten hymn, Abide With Me, which has a line all around change and decay. And that is all I see that this administration has presided over, the decay of public services. Libraries divested, youth centres closed, recycling points removed. There's been complete inertia on Gurnell, and that continues with it being kicked into the long grass with the announcement today. Tower blocks are still being built, despite the administration's promise that they would have a tall buildings policy. Tree pruning has been delayed and ineffective. Street sweeping has been cut back. Recycling rates are dropping. And customer services, customer-facing services. Customers, the residents of this borough, are not getting the services that we wish. And what do we get from this administration? Obscure new titles for all the cabinet members, but no one understands. We get working groups and consultations which lead to a strategy, that lead to a framework, which lead to a plan, which lead to something else, but never any action from this council to improve the services of residents. Now we have to acknowledge that we are living in financial straitened times. The invasion of the Ukraine last week will undoubtedly cause problems across the globe and including in this country. And the pandemic has had a massive toll on our public finances, and the need to fund the NHS properly to clear the backlog is absolutely vital, and we are going to have to pay for that. And people's personal finances, the residents of Ealing's, their personal finances probably have not been in a more dire state for at least a decade, if not more. However, conversely, the council's finances are in relatively good shape. As Councillor Young has said, they've got an extra £13.7 million from government that they weren't expecting. They have £35 million in controllable reserves, £150 million in allocated controllable reserves. And yet, despite the fact that the finances are in decent state, they are proposing to take another £4.6 million from the taxpayer. We do not believe they should be hitting residents at this time by doing this. It is a disgrace. But if they really felt that they had to take that money from residents to improve services, we would at least acknowledge that that was a decent argument. But they're not. £3.5 million of that £4.6 million is putting straight into reserves, not being spent on the residents of this borough. And in conjunction with the Labour Mayor of London, who you all supported and campaigned for last year, who's putting an 8.8% increase in his tax, you are hitting residents for thousands more pounds this year.
Time, please.
Just to sum up, Mr. Mayor, instead of what you're doing, you could be reintroducing weekly street sweeping. You could be turning up the street lights again. You could be funding some police hubs in wards. But instead, you're hammering the vulnerable who want to have residents visit, and you're allowing commuters to park in residence areas. What an unambitious and unhelpful budget. And Mr. Mayor, I would urge all members to oppose it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Malcolm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I first of all join all the other speakers who thank Ross and the finance team for all their work over the past year to balance our budget. It has been a particularly difficult year with COVID, as the previous year was. But I think now we're hopefully, fingers crossed, coming out of it. We need to focus on how the finances will give residents and services to what residents need and want. So I'm going to focus on one area, which is about engagement of the council with residents. Having spent much time in the past year when allowed to, I've been knocking on doors in Southfield, in Acton, in Ealing Common and Hanger Hill, and it's clear what people want. It isn't the Conservatives, just in case anyone was thinking that, but it's actually residents and businesses want to be heard and properly listened to. And I know the leader a number of months ago made a number of statements on that sort of track, but there are still many areas where the council is not doing what they said they would do and not being properly listened to. It's one thing to do a consultation, but you have to do it consistently around the borough. And so one way to do this is to increase the democratic involvement of residents, voluntary groups and communities. This was done many years ago under area committees, and then that changed to ward forums. They stopped because of COVID. In Southfield and some other wards, they continued virtually where that was possible. But looking at the papers here, we can see ward forums in some form will continue, but it looks like for only a year. And that is regrettable if that's the intention of the council. More needs to be done, not just in the next year, but in the future after that. As a reminder, there are many wonderful projects that the council has done via ward forums that wouldn't have happened without those councillors, voluntary groups or ward forums existing. So the council on some areas such as planning hasn't really listened to people, and that's why people's opinions of the council is very dim. And ward forums is one mechanism that can help turn the corner in terms of consultation and engagement. Other comments on the doorstep often comment about the poor street cleaning and the environmental elements of their street, that when they leave their house, that's what they see. That's how they judge the council as being good or bad, clean or dirty. But a lot of the spending is done centrally. It may be seen to be efficient, but actually it's a blunt instrument, and it's not really sometimes the best way to manage and spend some of our revenue. An alternative approach is that a greater share of the council's money is given to each ward or area, and those councillors, those communities and those community groups can identify and make decisions that affect their area. And that could be lighting. Which streets get better lighting than others? Which parks have different arrangements for cleansing than others? Roads and paving repairs. These are all done centrally, and actually some of them should be delegated down to ward councillors and areas. You can move money and decisions by making it more to a local level. No additional money is required. It will just lead to greater resident engagement, councillors being more proactive, and the outcomes that people like and support. The council will probably have a much, much higher engagement rate. So I'll end and summarise that I hope in 12 months' time that this council moves to more allocation of money to a local level rather than centralising so much, which it currently does, and based upon the Liberal Democrat approach and principles of proper engagement and devolution of trust and power to a more local level. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Teig.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Donnelly, the leader, and all the members and officers who've worked hard to produce this budget we are considering today. Ealing Council and indeed councils across London are being put in an almost impossible position by government. Not only has government decimated our budgets, but the pots of money that we are left with are increasingly unreliable, and we have to jump through countless hoops just to fund our business as usual activities. And according to the Institute for Government, local London authorities have been hit hardest of all. I know the government wants to level up the rest of the country, but this cannot come from levelling down London at the expense of Ealing residents and Londoners. After housing costs, London families face higher child poverty rates than elsewhere in Britain. The government is plugging the gaps in their spending by pushing the burden onto local councils and onto local residents. The modelling for the core spending power actually relies on us increasing council tax and rents on council homes to the maximum level. This comes at the same time as inflation is hitting a 30-year high, meaning delivering on our key statutory responsibilities is more expensive than ever. Yet again, we have been cornered into making difficult decisions by an out-of-touch Tory government. But instead of passing the whole burden on, we are increasing council tax and rents at below inflation levels. By keeping council tax as low as possible, we have already saved the average Ealing family £2,500. And as the leader has already outlined, we are committing in our forthcoming manifesto to keeping council tax low. We are also targeting support at those who most need it. Our council tax support scheme is one of the most generous in London and one of the only ones to offer up to 100% council tax discount for families on the lowest incomes. We all know that council tax is a blunt and often unfair instrument, so we are doing all we can to reduce inequalities in Ealing. Today, of all days, it would be remiss to talk about government funding for London local authorities without mentioning TfL. Yet again, TfL has received a piecemeal short-term extension that barely covers its running costs. London is the only major Western city not to receive central government funding for its transport network pre-COVID. And instead of providing the support that Londoners need to travel, the government has instead forced TfL to cut back on almost all but the most essential services. Ealing Council is stepping up to maintain funding for transport projects where we can, but without a fair and long-term TfL settlement, some things may have to remain on hold. Mr. Mayor, I am pleased to support this budget today, which is taking the necessary decisions in the context of a government point-blank refusing to stand in people's shoes and to stand up for vulnerable Ealing residents. Thank you.
So we are joined by Councillor Sumner online, who is going to speak virtually. Councillor Sumner.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, the phrase, Houston, we have a problem, was popularized by the 1995 film Apollo 13. Commander Jim Lovell said that these words to Mission Control to report a major incident aboard the space shuttle. Tonight, Mr. Mayor, I will rephrase this to say, Ealing, we have a problem. The budget before us exposes Labour's Achilles heel, fiscal incompetence and poor leadership. Recommendation 1.1 is to raise council tax by 1.9% and apply the social care precept by 1%. We all know there is a huge pressure on the social care budget, which is why my colleagues and I will support that part of the recommendation. However, Mr. Mayor, when you examine the budget papers closely, you will see that the council tax grab and the social care levy will raise 4.615 million in new taxes. But, and here is the big but, 3.5 million of the 4.615 million is going straight to reserves. Yes, you heard right. You heard me right. The Labour administration is collecting 4.615 million in new tax reserves and putting 3.5 straight into the bank. Their lips are saying that the situation is dire and services are under pressure. But rather than spend in these areas, they are cutting services and increasing fees whilst putting the taxes raised into the bank. Mr. Mayor, this is a textbook example of fiscal incompetence. The purpose of tax revenue is to allow governments to operate and provide goods and services for citizens. The council's own reports notes that the 1% increase is not enough to compensate for increased pressure across social care, send and housing, yet they are putting it in the bank, Mr. Mayor. How does putting the money in the bank help residents? And it is clear, Mr. Mayor, that the Labour Mayor for London also studies the same textbook on fiscal incompetence. Sadiq Khan is increasing his share of council tax by 8.8%, £31.93, the third largest increase since the formation of the GLA. Under Mayor Khan's leadership, the number of full-time staff has increased from 897 to 1,302. We don't talk about how many of his union mates are on 100,000 plus, nor will we talk about the 30% increase in his public relations budget, or the mess he made with Transport for London. Listening to the passionate support for the budget coming from the Labour benches, I am reminded of a quote I came across years ago, which says, "Often poor leadership is masked by those with the loudest voice and strongest opinions." Mr. Mayor, I rest my case and hope that on the 5th of May, when we usher in a new Conservative administration, we can say, Ealing, we had a problem, but Labour thankfully is gone. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Mahfouz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure about Shrove Tuesday and pancakes, but certainly off the back of that, I'm not sure which part of the country Councillor Sumner's referring to in terms of that Tory victory, but certainly feels like I've been whisked off to Brussels tonight because I've never heard so much waffle. So, Mr. Mayor, I stand to commend the budget that Councillor Donnelly has put forward. I want to start, as others have done, by congratulating and thanking Ross Brown and other officers across the council, but also to congratulate and thank Councillor Donnelly for the excellent work that he's done to bring forward this progressive budget that we have tonight. Mr. Mayor, during the pandemic, our residents had been hit hard. We had the second highest unemployment rate in West London. Southall had the highest furlough rate in the capital. The number of people claiming benefits doubled to over 20,000 of our residents. Knocking on doors across the borough, it's been really clear that so many of our residents feel genuinely let down and left behind by this government. But also, they feel that we have been on their side. Whilst those in power partied, our people have been pillars of support to those most in need. We've supported through the pandemic our residents, our businesses, the community and voluntary sector. When the government failed to think about business owners who paid their business rate liabilities through unscrupulous landlords, we didn't. Whilst the government ignored the fact that it was community and voluntary sectors, organisations that were stepping up to support those most in need during the crisis, we didn't. Whilst the government left so many of our communities behind without the resources to feed themselves or pay their bills, ignoring their plight, we didn't. Mr. Mayor, importantly, this budget sets to keep council tax low and continues to provide one of the most progressive and inclusive council tax support schemes available to those who can't afford to pay. Something that we will no doubt be even more important in the coming months as our residents face that Conservative cost of living crisis. Mr. Mayor, despite crippling cuts to local government budgets, we've continued to stand up for Ealing's residents, and we are proud of what we've achieved. Ealing Labour will always be ambitious for Ealing's residents, and we have delivered on our promises for our borough. I won't go over all of them again, but of course, those 4,000 residents into new or better paid jobs, those 13,000 residents who have got those qualifications that didn't have before, the nearly 800 apprenticeships that have been created, and so many of those other pledges that we've delivered. But Mr. Mayor, as some of my colleagues tonight have already done and will do throughout the evening, and I promised to do earlier, I want to announce one of our pledges. Importantly, a vote tonight, and let's be really clear, if you vote against this motion, this budget, you're voting against this pledge. A vote tonight is a vote for one of our key pledges, which is that that's part of our plan to recover from the pandemic, building on our bold plan for good jobs. We will secure 10,000 new well-paid jobs across the borough to help every family get a decent living income. Coronavirus has hit people's incomes hard, so we will secure new, well-paid jobs, support people back into work after lockdown, and deliver more support for small and local businesses to thrive. Mr. Mayor, quite simply, this is a budget that says loud and clear that Ealing Labour is on your side.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I thank Ross Brown and his team for all the hard work they've done on this budget. Mr. Mayor, such is the importance of the council text setting meeting that no opposition business or public engagement is allowed. Yet, disappointingly, at every budget meeting, rather than demonstrating leadership, the Labour administration's mantra to residents is, it wasn't me, it was the government. Many of us in this room are parents and grandparents. I'm sure we tell children and grandchildren, in life, you have a choice. Be a part of the problem or part of the solution. Many of us, especially my fellow Conservative colleagues, stood for election because we want to be part of the solution. Ealing, like many other boroughs, unquestionably has a lot of challenges to face, but the solution cannot be to blame the government. The bold, open, inclusive, and transparent council that Councillor Mason pledged to lead is not reflected in the budget before us tonight. There is nothing bold in hiking up parking charges. There is nothing bold in cutting services and calling them efficiency savings. There's nothing bold in increasing the higher rates for the community centres. There is nothing bold in increasing the cost of borrowing books from the libraries. And there's nothing bold in increasing the cost of using the sports and leisure facilities. And there's certainly nothing bold in increasing burial costs. In fairness to Councillor Mason, I will give credit to him for allowing the budget papers to transparently show. Over the last 3 years, the council has always received an additional grant, exact words in the budget report, some extra 13.731 million, which has allowed the council's core spending to increase by 6.33%. Yet, they're still ranting and blaming the government. Although the council is raising 4.615 million from the 1.99 council tax and 1% social care levy, the 3.5 million is going straight into reserves. Yes, residents' hard-earned cash is being taken and put straight into the bank. It is not being spent on services, despite pressure on social care, SEND and housing, as noted in the report. Not satisfied with raising council tax, the Labour administration is also hiking up the fees for several essential services. I do not need to remind the administration, we're all going through challenging times and our residents need us more now than ever. Mr. Mayor, I support the 1% social care levy, but I will not be supporting this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jammu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, ever since Labour was elected to serve the residents of Ealing in 2010, we've delivered results for local people, even during the most complex, difficult, and hostile circumstances created by both global challenges and the government's crippling of public services. And I'm proud of what we've achieved in Ealing. As Councillor Mason said, we've built 2,500 genuinely affordable homes. We've saved Ealing's A&Es after the Tories threatened to close it for years. We've created thousands of jobs and apprenticeships for local people with decent living incomes. And we fought crime and antisocial behaviour across Ealing despite Tory cuts to the police. Mr. Mayor, this budget will help bring Ealing Labour continue to deliver outcomes for local people. Despite less resource than ever and a higher demand than we've ever seen before, this budget provides residents with a sense of security that local council is there for you right now. whilst also having space to rise to any future challenges that may come. With 60 pence in every pound spent by Ealing Council being spent on adults and children, I'm so proud that this budget continues to prioritise those who need our help the most, just like we have done for the past 12 years. This budget continues to properly fund essential services. It provides adult social care and the resource it needs, and it provides targeted support for our most vulnerable residents, all whilst maintaining financial stability for the future in case of future shocks like COVID-19. Mr. Mayor, this is all with a 54% cut to local government finances in real terms, and whilst government leaves us without a proper plan to fix social care. Whilst the Tories continue to differ, the cost of this is being forced into everyday people. The social care precept and social care levy forced onto council taxpayers by the government means that people are now paying twice for adult social care services, but they are still not being provided with sufficient help. Families are still having to make heartbreaking decisions to give their loved ones the care that they need. Mr. Mayor, so why is it so important? As Councillor Mason has said, that even if the Tories don't, Ealing Labour has a plan to fix social care in Ealing as part of our manifesto for the 2022 local elections. We are committed to helping 3,000 of our most vulnerable residents at home and committed to paying the London living wage to care workers. Beyond this, our manifesto will also continue to work for everyone who needs our support. Even as local government funding continues to decrease in real terms, we are committed to making council tax low for 4 years. Unlike the Tories, we believe that residents shouldn't keep paying the price for government's decade-long mismanagement of public finances. Yet the Tories' final local government funding settlement for this has council tax rises baked in, meaning that extra support for councils from the government is essentially coming from people's pockets. At the same time, funding from central government for local council continues to decrease in real terms. However, Mr. Mayor, unlike the Tories, we want people to thrive, not just get by. Ealing Council has less resource and more demand than ever before, but we know that we need to continue to be ambitious for local people and carry on working hard to deliver on their priorities, providing good jobs and decent living incomes, tackling the climate crisis, fighting crime, recovering from the pandemic, building genuinely affordable homes, providing a fairer start, and reducing inequality. Both our budget strategy and manifesto pledges for 2022 will continue to do just that, which is why I'm happy to support this budget. I'd also like to thank Councillor Donnelly and the officers for all the work that they've done on this budget. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Conti.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When residents receive their council tax bill, they'll see they're paying 4.25% more, thanks to almost a 3% rise since Labour administration and almost 9% rise by London's Labour mayor. But what are residents getting with that £4.6 million extra that they're paying? Are you reintroducing weekly street cleaning? No. Are you allocating capital funding for Gurnell Leisure Centre in this budget? No. Just a video today essentially kicking it into the long grass. Or are you putting money back into school crossing patrols, for example? No. Are you replacing funding taken away from our local library sets in Pitshanger, Northfield, or Wood End Library? No. So residents are being asked to shell out more, but are getting less. Charges are going up, and this administration is funneling the bulk of that rise, 3.5 million, into reserves. And that's before we even get to the London mayor, who's clobbering Londoners with an almost 9% rise. And what are Ealing residents getting for it? Is it easier to move around the city? No. For a mayor who promised 0 strike days, Sadiq Khan has overseen 19 strike days as mayor. Are community police bases closed under his watch going to reopen? No. But we have seen a 127% rise in staffing costs at GLA. We've seen a rise of almost a third in the mayor's PR budget. So we're seeing that Labour is costing more and giving residents less. We could have spent about half of this £4.6 million that you're raising in council tax to reintroduce weekly street cleaning. Residents continuously raise the state of our streets of councillors, and the service is just not as frequent as it should be. You could have put money back into local library services, but you chose not to. Councillor Mahfouz earlier mentioned about the rise in national insurance, money that's being spent to tackle the NHS backlog and paying money into social care, rather than just increasing reserves. He mentioned that it's taking people's hard-earned money, but where does he think people are going to get the money to pay for the council tax rise? They talk the talk, but when it comes to something that they can actually control, how much council tax residents pay, they choose to put it up. We'll be opposing this budget because it increases costs on residents, both in taxes and charges, but fails to deliver the level of services that residents of Ealing deserve.
Thank you. Councillor Costigan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm proud to speak tonight in support of the fourth Labour budget of this council cycle, and in fact, this new Labour administration's first budget, a budget that invests in the future of our borough. When this new Labour administration took over just 9 months ago, we made a clear commitment to be an open, transparent and inclusive council. A clear commitment to build stronger and more connected communities in Ealing, and a clear commitment to deliver on the key priorities that matter to local people. Because we are firmly on the side of our residents, from helping families recover from the pandemic and fighting crime and antisocial behaviour, to tackling the cost of living crisis, building affordable homes and re-greening, rewilding and recycling in our borough. And tonight's budget is all about making sure our finances are aligned with our ambitions for our communities and for our borough. It's about setting out our priorities for the coming 4 years and beyond. I'm delighted we have been able to deliver so much of our climate action agenda already. We promised we would plant 30,000 trees, but we've done even better. We planted 37,000. We've been awarded green flag status for 23 of our parks, a record for Ealing. We've rolled out our successful food waste collection service to flats and have reduced landfill to almost zero. We've invested in new cycle routes, including Uxbridge Road and Fisher's Lane, are on track to install 500 electric vehicle charging points so that all residents are within 10 minutes from one, and introduced 14 school streets. And we've become a leader across London on retrofitting council and private homes to reduce emissions and fuel poverty. We've done so much, but this budget is the basis of our plans to do so much more. In this budget, we're increasing what we spend on street sweeping and refuse collection by over £1 million. Since we took the service back in-house, performance has improved by leaps and bounds, but I'm determined to make it the best in London. We're investing almost 21 million in our streets and footpaths, making it easier for all road users to get around the borough, including pedestrians and cyclists. These are huge investments, but we'll shortly be going to the residents of Ealing and asking them to invest in us, to invest in Ealing Labour and in our plans to tackle the cost of living crisis, fight crime and antisocial behaviour, build affordable homes, and regrow, rewild, and recycle our borough. COVID has shown us just how important green spaces are, and tonight I'm delighted we can announce that if re-elected in May, Ealing Labour will create 10 new parks and open spaces in our borough. I can also announce that we will plant 50,000 more trees, soaking up carbon emissions and creating natural shade and flood defences. We will give a massive 800,000 square metres back to nature, establishing habitats and improving biodiversity. Our residents agree we need to tackle the climate crisis, protect the environment and do even more to make Ealing cleaner and greener and to make so much more of our borough open and accessible for people to enjoy. Mr. Mayor, with this budget, we're building a firm foundation on which to do this. We're investing in Ealing, and in May, we will be asking the people of Ealing to invest in Labour, because Ealing Labour is on your side. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dabrowska.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As many of you might know, I'll be standing down in May. After the sudden and unexpected death of my father late last year, I know that I need to spend more time looking after and being with my mother, who remains in fragile health. It has been an enormous pleasure and privilege to serve my ward of Ealing Common, where I grew up, attended nearby schools, where my dog fell into the nearby Gusby Park pond, and in the last 16 years fighting for my residents. I remember when I joined the council in 2006, many of us used to walk to the car park at the back of the town hall, just behind this room, only to have rats scurrying around our feet in the dark. What a wake-up call that was. Mr. Mayor, tonight will be the 16th budget debate that I've been a part of. I'd like to say that each year they have gotten better, but they have not. Whether Labour appreciates this or not, we on this side of the chamber are pragmatic enough to know that there will never be enough funding to meet the ever-growing need for everything. This is the truth of the matter. The shopping list is endless. However, where we fundamentally disagree is on what we prioritise. We believe in prioritising residents, whilst Labour's actual priorities are big businesses, and sadly overdeveloping the community with rabbit hutch apartments. And before you start heckling me down, let me give you some examples. In the past year or so, I've had first-hand experience of adult social care. I noticed how money is spent, used, and wasted, whilst others go without as a result, creating an unequal level of service. Certain savings over recent years could have been made due to prompt decision-making and action, such as sorting out the wasteful spending in adult social services, or getting an injunction against unauthorised encampments in place so much earlier, would I say thousands, if not millions of pounds, which could have been spent on vital services or be reinvested into better facilities. Poor decisions playing politics in this chamber when a good initiative is on the table. The proposal to increase council tax tonight by 3%, which undoubtedly every Labour council will support, will raise 4.615 million. However, rather than spend it on vital local services under pressure, 3.5 million of that is going straight into reserves, i.e. the balance sheet. Effectively, the cash and bank line, also known as big businesses. How does having money in the bank help residents when at the same time you're increasing the fees and charges for nearly every service that impacts every generation of every family in this borough? Everything from parking charges, book borrowing costs, leisure use, pitch rentals, to burial costs is going up. Under Councillor Bell's watch, the council had an unhealthy relationship with a certain housing association or two. Big business, yet again. They were allowed to build the most soulless copy and paste housing in the borough, calling them homes. Calling them homes would be wrong. The developers count their profits and leave residents with estates with poor lighting, uncared for and weedy landscapes and shoddy workmanship. But these are the type of big businesses that fund expensive trips to Cannes and donate to councillors' charities, so all must be good. I know that the new leader has said he's sorry he accepted from such big businesses, but is silent as to whether he's truly sorry enough to repay the thousands in hospitality he undoubtedly received. Big businesses, may I remind you, the residents in Southall have had to put up with years of ill health and unmentionable stink from a development that many of you Labour councillors campaigning on, saying it wouldn't happen over your dead bodies. However, many sacrifice their principles at the altar for the opportunity to secure favour with the big developers, and in some cases, perhaps even expand their undeclared property portfolios. You know who you are. Everyone knows I'm passionate about fair decisions in planning, aspiring and rather opinionated to get the most appropriate developments in the borough. Engaging with the residents as well as architects and developers, making such an important feature of local authority work transparent to all and not behind the proverbial closed doors. There's an old saying which goes, how can a tree survive if its roots are poisoned inside? Mr. Mayor, I have to say that whilst there are many good eggs in the council who have formidably carried out their duties for the benefit of the residents,
Time, please.
I'm very grateful for their time and efforts. Unfortunately, I can't say the same to the decisions made over the years by the administration in this town hall. Coupled with the Mayor of London's increase of 8.8%, who has spent to the tune of 75 million on PR since he came into the office.
Thank you.
Final line. Mr. Mayor, I can't support the core council tax increase within this budget. Whilst I will no longer fight from these benches, I will for sure be one to challenge from afar, as all I want is to make Ealing better for its residents, not crippling them when we are coming out of this awful pandemic. We need to support our fellow Ilonians the best we can when they need us. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is online, Councillor Sahota.
Thank you. I am pleased to speak in support of this budget this evening. There can be no doubt that all our residents, businesses and offices have gone through one of the most challenging periods in living memory, but we have seen glimmers of hope throughout. We have seen communities come together to support each other through mutual aid groups, checking in on friends and neighbours, and doing every possible thing to reduce older people's social isolation. I am proud that Ealing Council has been able to support our wonderful faith and community groups in this effort. We have awarded 62 voluntary groups emergency grants to when our residents needed us, we stepped in. Ealing Together was formed by a coalition of 78 local organisations, charities and residents coordinated by Ealing Council. The work that was carried out was inspirational and included help from 1,468 volunteers. As Councillor Donnelly said, through Ealing Together, we worked with the community sector to rapidly distribute 14,000 food parcels to families who needed it. I am sure we all remember that at that time, the government had to be shamed by footballer Marcus Rashford into even doing the bare minimum by guaranteeing that those in receipt of free school meals would be supported during the school holidays. In sharp contrast, our teams changed their ways of working overnight and did what residents needed us to do. We know that social isolation was a problem even before COVID contributed to many residents not understanding how or where to access support they needed. As a result, Ealing Together took over 10,000 phone calls taken on our specially created helplines, and the council made 32,000 calls out to vulnerable residents to offer help. All kinds of support was offered to people who needed it, from referrals of income and debt support schemes, advice on how to access business grants, and direction to emergency food resources. We also provided businesses and self-employed residents when we all knew the government's furlough scheme woefully failed this group. More than 14,000 local businesses and nearly 3,000 sole traders received a share of over 100 million of business rates reliefs or grants to help them throughout the worst period of the economic nightmare presented by the pandemic. But we are not out of the woods yet. We are potentially only at the start of the economic crisis, and we have to be prepared to respond to challenges yet unknown. That's why Councillor Donnelly is right to prioritise bolstering our reserves and why I support this budget today. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Councillor Gland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I would love to thank Ross Brown and his team who've put this budget together and kindly briefed us on its content with their customary impartiality. But Mr. Mayor, I can't support this budget as presented. Ealing residents are going to see their council tax rise by 4.2%. And this in a time of inflation due to an economic rush post-pandemic, and of course to economic uncertainty caused by the necessary sanctions taken against the government of the Russian Federation because of its monstrous invasion of Ukraine. And I would add, as someone who has in-depth knowledge of how difficult life is for people in Russia, I found Councillor Mahfouz's conflation of the Prime Minister with the Russian President quite disgraceful. Now, I personally have huge respect for Ealing residents. They shoulder the cost of council tax with a shrug and they get on with life. But I think we are duty bound to make it clear to them what their council tax is made up of. Very few would argue about a rise in the social care precept of 1%. In fact, I doubt we'll hear a contrary word about that tonight from anyone in this chamber. But the GLA element charged through council tax has gone up by 8.8%. And I'm afraid this is about an incompetent London mayor who ducks responsibility for everything, who has allowed the City Hall staff budget to grow by 127% to a staggering £81.8 million, whose press office costs nearly £1 million a year, and who has run the world's commercial capital in a fundamentally unbusinesslike way. Mr. Mayor, the freeze on TfL fares was Sadiq Khan's political choice and cost over £640 million in lost revenue. Now, this kind of profligacy should have given Ealing's administration pause for thought before proposing a rise of 1.99% in the base rate of council tax. Again, this is a choice, not a matter of necessity. 3.5 million of the 4.65 million raised by this increase are not being earmarked for vital council services. Rather, they're being raised in the context of service cuts and net increases in charges like parking and garden waste collection. No, 3.1 million of the funds raised are being added to the 34 million already sitting in controllable, non-ring-fenced reserves. Ealing's reserves may appear to be at the low end of the scale when compared to other London boroughs, but they are resilient enough. And the council has not, like some others, taken overexposed positions in crass property trading ventures. So I am arguing that a raise in base council tax is unnecessary, that Ealing residents should be allowed to keep as much of their hard-earned cash as possible, that they, not the council, know best how to manage themselves in the upcoming adversity. And I call on all colleagues here tonight not to support this budget.
Thank you. Councillor Jasbir Anand.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, this is an ambitious budget that protects services, helps residents who are struggling in and invest in Ealing priorities. Once again, we're being forced to set a budget where the government's support for local government has been too little, too late, and with no long-term certainty. Mr. Mayor, once again, we have a Chancellor boasting of increasing council spending power, while the small print shows that most of that boost comes from tax rises he is generously encouraging us to make. Once again, we're having to try to plan for increased demand and costs in our biggest spending areas without a proper future plan from government. This budget invests in protecting our most vulnerable children and adults. We are going into the future blind. Mr. Mayor, the government's grand plan for social care has turned out to be another mirage. It's just a tax grab on struggling families to provide a sticking plaster for our NHS and barely an IOU for the country's broken social care system. Mr. Mayor, this is no way to run a service that millions rely on. It's no way to treat councils who stand on a financial cliff edge because of rising social care bills. And it's no way to treat the tens of thousands of social care workers who have served through the toughest times under COVID and deserve proper pay, proper resources, and proper respect. Mr. Mayor, so much in this budget is this Labour administration stepping in where the government is failing. That's why we're investing in social care despite there being no plan from the government. That's why we're investing in highways and pavement despite the government refusing to give London its share of vehicle excise duty. That's why we're protecting our generous council tax support scheme, despite the government demanding we increase our council tax income to keep our heads above water. That's why, Mr. Ware, we're investing in our public services after more than a decade of them being ravaged by Tory austerity. Mr. Mayor, this budget invests in the priorities of Ealing residents. It keeps our support for the most vulnerable in the strongest possible state, and it reduces the financial impact on those who are hardest stretched. As we emerge from COVID and tackle the cost of living crisis, Mr. Mayor, we need a council that is in a strong financial position to invest in rebuilding and protecting. Mr. Mayor, this budget provides all that. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Councillor David Milligan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me also add my thanks to Ross Brown and his team. And I hope by now he's got the message that on both sides of this chamber, we support all the work that his team has done. And I'd like to thank him for briefing us as well. As my colleagues have said, we don't support the increase in the council tax that's proposed this evening. Now, we all know that the many countries are struggling with increasing costs, not least the United States, whose inflation rate is considerably higher than ours. And we all know the deteriorating relationship with Russia over many months, with the knock-on effect on energy prices, is largely responsible for this. So what does this council do? It jacks up council tax to the maximum it can, without any care for the hard-working people and families of this borough who will have to pay for it. But what does the mayor do? He jacks it up by 8.8%. 8.8%. How unthinking and uncaring is that? And this all nets out at 4.25% increase in council tax, while we keep talking about people's concerns of the rate of inflation. Frankly, it's outrageous and uncaring. Now, this council constantly complains about lack of finance, but let's be clear, the total income this year to the council of the London Borough of Ealing will increase by 6.25%, with a number of top-up grants from the government. So despite the huffing and puffing from Labour councillors this evening, 6.32% is considerably more than the current rate of inflation. Now, this Labour council moaned like mad for months and months that it wanted more money to help to support residents during the pandemic. They kept saying that the government was putting unrealistic demands on them. But the papers this evening tell us that there is a staggering £10,930,000 in unused COVID-19 grant balances, just sitting there in balances, unused, just sitting there. Clearly, it has to be used for COVID recovery. But the longer it is since the depths of the pandemic, presumably, the freer we can be with how this money is allocated. But we've heard this evening that more than £5 million has been raised from fines from drivers driving through the discredited LTN barriers. Now, we were briefed by finance officers that this money is still there, unused in a council account. So this money should be given back to the people of the borough who struggled so long with having to put up with the discredited and unwanted LTNs. So whilst we agree that there is pressure on providing social care, we support the 1% social care precept. We cannot support the 2% or 1.99% council tax. So this council is proposing raising an extra £4.6 million this evening, whilst proposing to add another £3.5 million to reserves. So this council receives 6.3% more income this year, has £5 million sitting from the unused from the LTNs, has £10.9 million still unused from COVID grants.
Time,
then
please.
wants to add, just summing up, Mr. Mayor, then wants to add an additional £3.5 million to balances, yet still wants to inflict a council tax increase on the residents of this borough.
Yeah.
Frankly, Mr. Mayor, any reasonable person would think that this is just plain wrong.
Thank you.
So we will be voting against this increase this
Thank
evening.
you. The next speaker is Councillor Lauren Wall.
As Cabinet Member for Genuinely Affordable Homes, I'm pleased to support this budget, as I know just how tough the government's decade of crippling and cruel austerity measures have been on local people across our 7 towns in Ealing. The rosy fantasy situation Tory councillors have painted tonight of Ealing is simply delusional. There are now 11,700 families waiting for accommodation on our housing register. Families that are currently in accommodation that is completely unsuitable for their needs or without the stability of a permanent home. I've seen the effects of this firsthand during my time as a councillor and a cabinet member. Whilst the Tories have failed to take action, residents in Ealing are plunged into poverty through unaffordable rents eating up large proportions of their incomes and the threat of eviction being ever looming. Other residents are cramped in homes that are too small for their families or forced to live in unsuitable or unsafe conditions. For young people, home ownership is also often a distant dream. And this is before taking into account the Tory cost of living crisis that is beginning to bite for local people, with the Bank of England saying that households are bracing themselves for the biggest drop in living standards in 3 decades. Yet despite a 54% cut in real terms to local government budgets over the last decade, I have also seen just how hard Ealing Council has worked to alleviate the worst effects of the Tory housing crisis for residents. And I know just how important it is that we are able to continue to do this through our budget strategy for this year. Over the past 4 years, we've reduced the number of people who are homeless in Ealing and accommodated 500 rough sleepers throughout the pandemic. We've also expanded the private rented sector licensing scheme, ensuring that more tenants have good, safe and quality homes. And Mr. Mayor, by May 2022, we're set to have delivered 2,700 genuinely affordable homes across the borough, suitable for those from all walks of life. Unlike the Tories, we recognised that the answer to London's housing crisis would not be delivered by the private sector, which is why we started the most ambitious council house building programme in London. And we've gone above and beyond our initial target set in 2018. We did this through our own innovation and our determination to deliver homes for people that cost no more than 1/3 of the average local income. A stable home is foundational to every corner of your life, and I'm proud that at Ealing Council we recognise that and are determined to deliver for as many people as possible, even when the Tories refuse to do so. This is why, as Councillor Mason has already stated, we at Ealing Labour are pledging to go even further on our target and deliver 4,000 safe and genuinely affordable homes for residents over the next 4 years, should we be re-elected. And we're determined to continue building new genuinely affordable homes for local people long into the future, and our budget strategy makes space for this. Mr. Mayor, this budget strategy continues the same principles that I've seen over the last 4 years in our approach to council house building. It adopts the same determination, ambition, and innovation to provide more of those who need our support most, more for those who need our support most, even when we are faced with less resource and unpredictable government financing. I'm proud to be a part of this council that is unapologetic about its ambition for local people. And I'm proud that we've taken measures to prepare for what challenges may come our way in the future. That's why I support this budget.
Thank you. Colleagues, as we have reached 9:30, I need confirmation from 14 councillors if they want to continue the meeting. And I'll go straight to the majority party whip. Mr. Shaw.
We are not looking to raise the guillotine, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go straight on to the vote then. And this is going to be a recorded vote.
A brief summary, please, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Do we need to sum it up or is okay? If it's necessary, then.
Well, I could take a hint, Mr. Mayor. Viewers at home won't notice that the hall now looks like the outside bar at a ski resort. I'll try to warm the atmosphere. Need to make a couple of points. Clear confusion in the lines coming from the Conservatives, at least. Depending on whether one listens to Councillor Young or Councillor Stafford, either we were wrong for not having raised council tax, or we were wrong because we did raise council tax. Councillor Young, to his shame, has failed to indicate to his colleagues the difference between earmarked and unallocated reserves. What I spoke about here was us having flexibility. These are unallocated reserves. They can be used at short notice for whatever purpose the borough needs them. Councillor Gallant rightly pointed out that we face another as yet unquantifiable challenge from the Ukrainian war, and yet I am criticised for having put money aside to deal with such emergencies. Make your minds up. And it's extraordinary. Councillor Stafford refers to us having received money we weren't expecting. That's just the point. We weren't expecting the money. And if you look in the MTFS now, the impact of the of the unpredicted and not repeatable funding is that our deficit for next year has doubled from £11 million to £22 million. So if you get your mates to promise us what we'll get next year, the year after, and the year after that, I'll start putting together, if re-elected and reappointed, an MTFS which reflects that. In the meantime, you'll get from us what your government gives to us. I think I'll leave it broadly there. I think we have exhausted the opposition bench. I think it's sweet that they all get to speak in a debate like this, and we'll be trying very hard in May to ensure that they have the same privilege after the election. Councillor Stafford referred to Abide With Me. I think the hymn I heard from the opposition benches tonight was, "Oh God, our help in ages past, our hope in years to come." I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. We are going to go straight to the votes now. It will be a recorded vote, and the chief executive will be reading the names out, and the head of democratic services will be noting them to add them into the next minutes. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. This is a recorded vote on the recommendations on the budget strategy at item 9 on tonight's agenda. When I read your name, councillors, could you say whether you're for, against, or abstaining? Councillor Shaw.
For.
Councillor Mason.
For.
Councillor Costigan.
For.
Councillor J. Anand.
For.
Councillor Mahfouz.
For.
Councillor Gordon. Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Kelly.
For.
Councillor Jammu.
For.
Councillor Raza. Councillor Donnelly.
For.
Councillor Nagpal.
For.
Councillor Manro.
For.
Councillor L. Wall.
For.
Councillor R. Wall.
For.
Councillor Brett.
For.
Councillor Mahmood.
For.
Councillor Martin.
For.
Councillor Rice.
For.
Councillor Tighe.
For.
Councillor Cordier. Councillor Ardier. Councillor Milligan.
Against.
Councillor Stafford.
Against.
Councillor Young.
Against.
Councillor Kumar.
Against.
Councillor Gallant.
Against.
Councillor Conti.
Against.
Councillor De Rosca.
Against.
Councillor Ball.
Against.
Councillor Malcolm.
Against.
Councillor Steed.
Against.
Thank you, councillors. Oh, I beg your pardon, Mr. Mayor
Abstain.
and Madam Deputy Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are moving from this item to the next item, appointment of a standard independent person. Councillor Mutta, are you online? No? Okay, so we just agreed this report. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, the next one is Members Allowance Scheme 2022-23. Are the recommendations agreed?
No.
So those who are in favor? Those who are against? Abstentions? So it's agreed. Item number 12 on the agenda, changes to the Constitution Citizen Tribunal. Agreed. Item number 13, Pay Policy Statement 22-23, recommendations agreed. Arrangements for the appointment of the external auditors 23-24 to 27-28. Are the recommendations agreed again? Good. Treasury Management Mid-Year Report. Are the recommendations noted? Appointments to committees and other bodies. There are no appointments to the committees or other bodies tonight. Urgent key decision exempted from colon. Are there any urgent decisions? Yeah. Agreed? Date of the next meeting is 19th of April 2022, and that meeting will be held in the council chamber. All being well and subject to Sam's agreement again. With that, and I will make sure if the meeting is held in the chamber, I will make sure refreshments are available, and hopefully we will get back to some sort of normality. And that is also the wish of the interim chief executive as well. Thank you. So this meeting is closed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good night all.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.